Good evening, everyone. I'd like to open up the meeting and welcome everyone to the ordinary meeting of Council on the 27th of March 2018. Moonee Valley Council respectfully acknowledges the traditional custodians of this land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present. And Council also extends their respects to elders and descendants of other Aboriginal peoples here today with us. I'd like to advise members of the gallery that open sessions of this meeting are being recorded and live streamed on the internet. The recording will also be archived and made available on Council's website. Gallery attendees are advised that their presence may be recorded. Before we begin, on behalf of the City of Moonee Valley, I would like to, and my fellow councillors, I would like to pay tribute to Del King, who passed away last week at aged 42. Until very recently, Del was active in the Flemington Rotary, serving as president, and she was previously a member of the Committee of Management at Wingate Avenue Community Centre. Del initiated and supported many fabulous community initiatives in Ascot Vale and Flemington, including active community policing on the estate, promoting community safety to the wider community. Del was also a member of the Moonee Valley's Community Safety Committee as well. We pass on our sincere condolences to Del, her family and her friends. Councillors, apologies. Do we have any apologies tonight? No? Councillors, confirmation of minutes. Councillors, do I have any opposition to any item on the minutes for the ordinary meeting of Council held on Tuesday the 13th of March 2018? Yes, Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a minor amendment that I did not chair the Leisure and something or other committee. In fact, I wasn't even in attendance, so I'm not sure how that slipped in there, but maybe it was just a typo, just to let you know.
Okay.
I'll give you the date of that. Sorry? It's the minutes, is it? Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
This is the minutes. Yeah, this is not the Mayor and Council reports.
Apologies.
That's right. I'll re-ask the question again. Councillors, do I have any opposition to any item on the minutes for the ordinary meeting of Council held on Tuesday the 13th of March 2018? I'll confirm the minutes as confirmed. Thank you. Declarations by councillors. Councillors, do I have any declarations by councillors on tonight's agenda? Presentations. Councillors, do we have any presentations this evening? Petitions and joint letters. Councillors, do we have any petitions and joint letters? Councillor Marshall.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Councillor Byrne and I would like to jointly table a petition. This is a petition that has received over 1,570 signatures in a matter of 50 hours, and I'll let Councillor Byrne provide the details.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. So this petition, as Councillor Marshall said, has only been going for 50 hours, so there will be a second part to this, to the numbers. However, it is from the President of the Essendon District Netball Association, Richard Randall, and he is urging MVCC specifically, and lists all of the councillors' name, to finally take action in making an impact where it will be most felt by the sporting girls of Moonee Valley. And that the projects that Moonee Valley City Council immediately need to commit to are a 4-court indoor stadium for multi-use, netball and basketball, which is also known as highball, a minimum of 24 outdoor lit competition compliant courts for netball, both with sporting amenity, toilets, change rooms, first aid and umpires room, and admin and meeting facilities.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Thank you. Councillors, I believe Councillor Byrne has requested leave for April.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to request leave from March the 28th, being tomorrow, to the 10th of April, inclusive.
Thank you, councillors. Do I put that to the vote? Yes, Councillor Marshall. Okay, Councillor Marshall will move that we accept the leave of absence. Councillor Sorais will second that. I believe there's no discussion. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Questions from the public. Mr Lancaster, do we have any questions from the public?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There is one question from the public, and the Director of Planning and Development will answer that question.
Thank you, Ms Ryder.
Thank you, and through you, Mr Mayor. Michael and Faye Bergen of Essendon submitted the following question. Why were residents not given a chance to voice their opinion and concerns at a consultation meeting after lodging an objection to the development of 261 A, B and C of Keilor Road, Essendon? The application for this proposed development is being considered by Council tonight because it's a major development that exceeds 4 stories. In accordance with our protocols, it did not require a consultation meeting because there were less than 10 objections. This is outlined in the report at section 2.5. Your objections were received, acknowledged and considered by all relevant departments as part of the assessment of the application and are summarised in 3.9 of the report on the agenda. This includes the considerations regarding building setback, height, overshadowing, balcony screening, privacy, overlooking, car parking, waste, stormwater management, vehicle manoeuvring and boundary fencing. Appropriate conditions have been provided by officers to address the concerns.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you. Any other questions? That was the only one?
Yes.
Okay. Reports by Mayor and Councillors. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Lawrence, I believe you have
Just a slight amendment, thank you, Mr Mayor, that I was not present, or did I not chair the meeting on, just find the actual date, sorry.
on the 28th of February.
28th of February, I did not chair the Combined Leisure and Active Community and Sports Community Organisation Committee meeting, and I was not present.
Fine, we'll take that as noted. And you're
Thank
happy to move the reports by Mayor and Councillors?
I've got a...
one more.
Mayor, I have a slight amendment to mine. My leave of absence is from the 21st of February, not the 28th that's noted there. And I'd like it noted that the leave of absence was due to sick leave, not just absence, whatever that may be.
You happy to move the motion as well, Councillor Cusack?
Oh, if there are no other amendments, I'm quite happy to move the motion.
And Councillor Lawrence, happy to second it?
More than happy to, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. First report on tonight's agenda is 9.1, Council report, and it's entitled 164 Mascoma Street. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Gauchi-Marucci.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Gauchi-Marucci, would you like to speak to the item?
Just briefly, there were a number of concerns that were raised during the consultation that Councillor Sharp, Lawrence and I ran. Most of those concerns have been addressed through amended plans by the applicant, and the remaining concerns have been addressed through conditions that have been provided by the officers as part of the approval recommendations. So,
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to support the recommendation from the council officer and my fellow ward councillor Gauchi-Marucci, the site area is 534 square metres with a natural 3 metre fall on this block. We're building, the applicant is building a dual occupant development site which demonstrates an adequate level of compliance with relevant planning scheme and res code. I think the conditions set down by the council officers in terms of the development ensure that the character, the street setback, the overlooking issues, landscaping, storage will comply with that of the local and has listened to the local residents and ensured that those measures are met. The off-street parking allows for 2 parking spots on both of the units, which meets the requirements. And the building height at 7.59 metres is not excessive and meets the height requirements. I would feel sure that in the case of this application that it would definitely, should it go before VCAT, be approved by that body, and therefore I support the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any other councillor like to speak to the item? Councillor Gouch, like to close? Put us straight to the vote? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Council Report 9.2 on tonight's agenda is on page 44 as entitled 261A, 261B and 261C Keilor Road, Essendon. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation with an amendment.
Sure. Would you like to read out the amendment?
Yes, please. Point 1A, or new point 1A, the setbacks of levels 4 and 5 from the southern boundary to comply with the requirements of Table 1, rear setback for Precinct 3 of the Design and Development Overlay Schedule 7. Point 1B, any subsequent internal changes as a result of Condition 1A, or subsequent Condition 1 requirements are to be renumbered as a result.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Sharp, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you. Yes, just quickly, this is for a development in Keilor Road where we're seeing obviously more higher density development. My main concerns, or I have a number of concerns with the proposal, but in saying that, the main areas of non-compliance that really impact the residents to the rear relate to the side and mainly the rear setbacks, hence these new conditions that I believe will go a long way to protecting the amenity of the residents behind this development. That's all I really need to mention for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sharp. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There's a few concerns on this site. It's an interesting development in that there was no consultation meeting. There was only 4 objectors, but having said that, it doesn't mean that as councillors and ward councillors particularly that we don't review the situation in great detail. Now, although the bulk and height of the development is considerable, there's an acceptable level of compliance with the Moonee Valley planning scheme, and to the credit of our planning officers and planning department, extra conditions have been added to the development, and they include the, as mentioned by Councillor Sharp, the changes to the setbacks on the southern boundary as per the DDA schedule. And if we look at the conditions listed in the officer's report, there's over 60 conditions, including all the sub-conditions as listed in Appendix 9.2. So it's a fairly thorough protection for local residents surrounding the development, and I give the council officers their dues in terms of making sure that there is adequate planning controls placed on this development for the local residents and ratepayers surrounding the property. So as mentioned, there were extra amendments as per Councillor Sharp's, as she mentioned, and they are important, particularly where the setbacks are concerned for the upper levels. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any other councillor like to speak to the item? Councillor Sharp, would you like to close?
Just quickly acknowledging the residents that put in the question earlier. As Councillor Lawrence mentioned, we do review all objections to the proposal, so even though there was not a consultation meeting, we have certainly looked at their concerns and hence requested the changes made to the proposal tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 9.3 on tonight's agenda is on page 72 as entitled Local Government Bill Exposure Draft Moonee Valley City Council Submission. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I'd like to move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cusack. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you. Mayor, the current state government a couple of years ago kicked off a review of the Local Government Act. And it's fair to say that anyone who has had any pleasure at all in dealing with the Local Government Act, picking up reading it, would know that it is a very cumbersome piece of legislation. And because of the various amendments that have been made over time, it doesn't sit together well. So it's fair to say it is certainly due for review. We've now gone through a number of stages and are at the process of the exposure bill stage. And this is where submissions have been invited to the exposure draft. Now, what will ultimately end up in Parliament obviously remains to be seen. There still could be significant changes, but we will know, obviously, hopefully not too far off. Now, various entities have made submissions in relation to the exposure bill, and that includes the MAV. And after councillors reviewed the MAV submission, we had a couple of additional issues that we thought that we should put in a separate submission in relation to. So there were two areas in particular that came up as themes, I think, based on our experiences of being councillors at local government level. And the first was the issue of councillor training and development. And one of the wonderful joys of local government is that anyone can put their hand up to be a councillor. You need no qualifications whatsoever, no experience. And that's wonderful because it makes it a very democratic process. But it also means that you have people sitting around making very important and big decisions in relation to issues which they might have no training or understanding about. And there would be some councillors who get onto council, have never read a financial statement, have no idea about how planning works, and you would hope that people come up to speed very quickly, and I know certainly our new councillors took it upon themselves, as we did last time around, to really inform themselves. But our view is that there should be mandatory training, and that mandatory training should be in core areas where you absolutely need to make sure that your councillors know what they're doing. So that's the first one. The second one is in relation to the code of conduct. And for me, it's always been a bit puzzling when I think, why should the standards differ depending on which council you're on? Surely we should say that there is a standard of behaviour expected of councillors, regardless of whether you're a councillor at Moonee Valley or a councillor at Mitchellshire or wherever it might be. So we're making the submission that there should be a standard code of conduct developed which applies across the state, and that should set out a whole range of things, including obviously dispute resolution processes that are actually workable and that really minimise people going through the full process and encourage the resolution of disputes early. You'll note that, Mayor, it's a relatively short submission, and that's only because we are required to put in our submission in a particular form, but I think these are really valuable and important issues, and I'm very pleased that we've decided to lodge a submission in relation to them.
Thank you. Councillor Cusack.
Mayor, there's, in supporting this motion, there's a couple of common sense factors involved in it. There's obviously no need to go over the land that the MAV have already tilled. And clearly most of what council was concerned about in those areas has been clearly addressed. But as Councillor Marshall says, the role of councillors is varied. And while there's no particular qualifications to be a councillor, I'm assuming and hoping that in each case, councillors have tendered adequate reasons why they should be elected, and the residents in the local areas have all agreed to that. However, there is that critical issue about how do you keep up with things. The role of local government is massively varied, and it requires many, many decisions in many areas, which may not be where your pet interests and thoughts and sometimes there are some things that you grow into and so on, but you cannot, in many of those, afford to sit idle and wait for all this sort of stuff to fall on you. There is no such thing as learning by osmosis in local government. You need to be on top of the game. So that's the point of our council position there. In respect of the second part, which is obviously about the code of conduct, we're all painfully aware of issues that relate to how councillors across the whole of the metropolitan area and regional and country Victoria have disported themselves on and off at times. And of course, we as a council are not immune to that. However, there is a fine line between balancing good and progressive debate and decision making and so on like that with decision-making that is not transparent, that is not available to the public, and can be, in some instances, detrimental to good policy making, good strategic planning. So the Code of Conduct is critical, that it becomes a statewide event, and that this council, I think, is smart in just making sure that that is very much on the agenda of the people who are going to ultimately take this through legislation in the state government, and not to allow situations arise where, you know, there is ridicule about the democratic processes caused by errors in judgment or errors in actual acting in their role as councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor like to say a few words? Before you close, Councillor Marshall, I totally agree with you. I believe councillors should have access to professional development because we are in an evolving environment within local government. And when I was on the MAV board, I started off the professional development group there, where councillors could actually do further education in, and get a diploma in local government, and also the AICD course, which gives them access to financial reading of profit and loss sheets, and this should be an ongoing thing every year for professional development for council. So I commend our council for putting this up to the MAV. So if you'd like to close, Councillor Marshall. That's fine. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Next item is 9.4 on tonight's agenda, is on page 78, as entitled Information Privacy Policy Review 2008. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Nation. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item?
Look, I will briefly. The Privacy and Data Protection Act 2014 puts some pretty significant obligations on organisations such as council, which are public sector organisations, and those obligations come to us when we are handling and managing personal information. As you'll see in the report, it sets out that as part of the current IT project that we're looking at, that we're actually going to be having the integration of various systems into a central name and address register. And so that requirement has meant that we have had to review our policy to make sure, obviously, that we comply with the applicable privacy legislation. And so that's really, it's very simple, and that's probably all I need to say about it.
Thank you. Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor. Only very briefly to add, it's probably quite timely given the recent conversation about personal data that we, and personal data being shared online, that we ensure as a council our new platforms conform to standards, particularly when we're interacting with thousands, over 120 plus thousand residents. It's really important that their personal information is treated as it should, and that we follow relevant policy and procedure. So more than happy to endorse this recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Any other councillor? Councillor Marshall, would you like to close?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Council Report 9.5 on tonight's agenda is on page 90, as entitled Grants Assessment Special Committee. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Nation.
I will move the officer's recommendation with a slight amendment, and that is to point 4, to include Councillor Andrea Serace.
Okay. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cusack. Councillor Nation, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mayor. Look, our grants program is one of the ways that we as a council connect with the community. When you total up the number of grants we give, the organisations go into the hundreds, and the amounts go into the thousands. And you'll see that in our operational budget, there's $397,000 for 2017-18. plus a little bit extra after we gave up 8,000 of our pay, that go towards local groups. Getting the formula right to ensure that money flows or is given to groups that provide services for our community that we don't as a council is really important. And this is probably the third or so iteration of developing a panel or a grant assessment special committee, as it is. So to work out exactly how to spend that money and to analyse applications based on a set criteria independently, and then put forward recommendations. So obviously this, as per point 4, this grants panel was open to all councillors, so any exclusions, only at that councillor's choice, so no councillor is being excluded. We've got 5 community members, a couple that have been previously on our panel and some new community members, and then 2 council officers who don't have voting status and are there to help the special committee run. So hopefully this third model gives us an accountable grants process and panel that will ensure that quite large portion of money, that quite large pool of money goes to the groups who can most use it, and based on a set criteria that all of the panel members vote to.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Councillor Cusack.
Mayor, and in support of this motion, we now are, as Councillor Nation points out, at a third iteration of how this committee comes together and how the grants process is allocated. If we go back to the dim dark days, which weren't all that long ago, this council, like quite a few others, operated its grants process on a very ad hoc basis, whether it was the mayor who distributed a certain amount of largesse, whether it was individual councillors did the same, or whatever. But there was never any strategic approach to the grants process. There was no knitting together of what a grants process should be. In fact, it was more like, this is my local fiefdom and I think I'll do something nice. Well, those days are just absolutely not on anymore. Having just spoke to the local government exposure bill, it's quite clear that those issues, those ways of operating can't happen anymore. A good grants process makes a council and a community really work together in concert with each other. It recognises that many in the community do it much, much better than council could ever do it, because there are micro issues or new and emerging areas that are the community's so far ahead of council on that we just will never catch up to them if we want to just do it for ourselves and wait for the great wheel to turn. So consequently, the grants process is a really important part of either addressing something very locally or actually starting our thinking in a very big way that matches up to our strategic position. It's also a clear way for us to be able to pilot ideas and see what works and what doesn't work. And in a lot of ways, it reduces risk for our council. It reduces risk for all of our ratepayers. And I've never seen a grant actually go out there and not absolutely work. There's always some kernel of good. But we get huge return on our grants, and we have because we actually strengthened this process some years ago. But now what we've got is balancing acts like Moonee Valley 2040. We have a strong council plan that talks about where we want to go to. And if we put the grants and line them up against those things, we're in a good place. And I think that the maturing process is what this is about. I want to, and if we now with this iteration develop our way through this, we will develop a level of comfort for the councillors and also for those community people who are the first people who are part of this, to actually be able to talk and champion the notion of grants and why they are an important aspect of any budget of council, which in the future I would hope and anticipate, as I've said before in this chamber, continue to grow in terms of quantum.
Thank you, councillor. Would any other councillor like to speak to the item? Councillor Sorais.
Just have a bit of a concern that all councillors were listed to attend this committee, bar Councillor Lawrence and myself, and that I've actually been addressed tonight to be on this committee. I wasn't probably privy to further discussions or previous discussions as to how that came about, so just seeking clarification.
Sure. Natalie?
Thank you, and through you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Sorais, an email had gone out and perhaps some that may have been missed. So there was, councillors were able to nominate themselves, so apologies for that omission.
Okay.
Is that clarification okay for you, Councillor Sorais?
Thank you.
Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Mayor. I think Councillor Cusack described perfectly how I feel about this being here before us, because it really is about this process maturing and getting to the point where we've ironed out the tweaks, the issues that might have concerned us, which primarily came around because all of us wanted to be involved in this process. And we wanted to have a say because we know how important these grants are, and we know how popular they are because they're always oversubscribed. And those conversations and those understandings about the value that they provide and the value that different groups and projects provide, I think have been very fulsome ones. And so now providing all councillors who want to participate in the grants process the opportunity to do so will perhaps avoid delays and mean that we're all there in at the ground level, being able to assess the information and make the decisions with our community members who give up an enormous amount of their time and become involved in this process, and we should be very thankful to them that they actually do that. So I'm more than happy for it to be to us, and I'm expecting that this will be the last time it comes to us.
Thank you. Any other councillor would like to speak to the item? Councillor Nation, would you like to close?
Just briefly, on top of the councillor and public members on this panel, obviously there is a great deal of officer work that goes in behind the scenes. We get privy to the applications, but also officer comments as well, to ensure that grants in areas that we may not have any familiarity or expertise in, that we can still work to a principles of decision-making formula to ensure that all grants are assessed accordingly and independently.
Thank you. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? All those in favour?
Councillor Sorais, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Sypet, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Cusack, Councillor Gauci-Marici.
All those against?
Councillor Lawrence.
Motion is passed. Council report on 9.6 on tonight's agenda is on page 105 and is entitled Standing Together and Supporting Diversity Statement. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor. I move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder?
Councillor Cusack, did you put your hand up before me? Sorry, I was quick to put mine up. But
I was looking that way, so I saw Councillor Marshall first. So, Councillor Marshall? No, that's fine. Councillor Nation, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and I do apologise in advance. I have copped a bit of hay fever today, so I'm a little bit sniffly and have a weepy eye. So
A little bit of honey might
yeah, I was going to say it's no different to normal. Mayor, it's with great pleasure, both as a local councillor and chair of the Diversity, Access, Equity and Inclusion Portfolio Advisory Committee, that I tonight get the chance to move Moonee Valley's Standing Together and Supporting Diversity statement. This statement is a commitment from us as a council and a councillor unit to recognise the importance of supporting our residents and recognising their human rights. It is a commitment to celebrate the amazing diversity of this city and the way we as a council embrace the inclusion of all members of our community. Our municipality is one of the most amazingly culturally diverse communities in Melbourne, with more than a quarter of all residents born overseas from a mix of over 100 countries, and a third of all residents speaking a language other than English at home. It is actually this amazing diversity so close to the heart of Melbourne CBD that lured me to Flemington as a university student many years ago, and as a boy from a very much English-speaking area of Geelong. Flemington and its thriving heart along Racecourse Road was a mix of different cultures and people that I instantly warmed to, and the first part of Moonee Valley that I chose to make home. However, unfortunately, not everybody embraces or appreciates this diversity. Be it your gender, cultural background, sexuality, religion or disability, there are parts of society that are less tolerant and for some reason feel the need to make those that are different feel lesser. And as such, the one downside of Australia evolving into a great multicultural country is that it gives rise and voice to those who fear people that are different to themselves. Those who felt the need to hurl racist abuse at members of our community outside an event at the Melbourne Pavilion late last year, for nothing other than happening to live across the road from the venue and for being culturally different. Those who feed on the fears of others and champion anti-Islamic or more recently anti-African sentiment by making ignorant, all-encompassing statements about individuals from particular communities. And those who have felt somehow justified hurling racial abuse at our own staff, obviously in search of some sort of bizarre self-gratification. The fact that this is happening, and happening here in Moonee Valley, is why we as a council must make a statement that we stand together as one. Diversity is a reality, it is inclusion that is a choice, and as a council and a councillor unit, it is a choice that we hopefully proudly make with a great passion by embracing those who may be different to ourselves and acknowledging the fundamental role they play in making Moonee Valley the thriving and amazing place that it is today.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Mayor. And I'm a bit weepy-eyed too, but not because I've got hay fever, because I am so pleased that off the back of Cultural Diversity Week and Harmony Day that we are choosing to make this statement. Because racist acts are acts of harm, and there is no moving away from that, and we certainly need to think about what racism means, because obviously the acts that Councillor Nation has spoken about, those very clear acts of vilification and hatred, are very much racist acts. But there are also more insidious and unspoken acts of racism that we always need to guard against and be mindful of. And like Councillor Nation, I grew up in an area that was not particularly diverse culturally, and for me, one of the things I absolutely adore about where I live is the diversity, and we have, within a very small radius around our house, neighbours who have an Eritrean background, Hungarian background, Italian, Greek, all sorts of diversity in a very short radius from our house. And certainly when you look at the data set out in the report, you can see what a diverse municipality that we actually are. And more than a quarter of our residents were born overseas, and in some areas, there you go, yourself, Mayor, in some areas such as Avondale Heights and Flemington, those figures are much higher too. So the real challenge, I think, now that we face as a society is that if you call out racism, if you don't just stand by and allow acts of racism to play out, you get people wheel out that line, this is political correctness gone mad, and I wish I had $1 for every time I'd heard that. But again, treating people fairly and decently is not political correctness, it is what decent people do. The report highlights how impactful racism and discrimination can be on individuals, and I won't go over the examples that Councillor Nation gave because they are good ones and they are recent ones that occurred in our own municipality. And for me, any society which values fairness, which values decency, and which values respect has to do all that it can to ensure that those values apply equally to all of its citizens. And as a member of Moonee Valley Council, I'm just so proud that we don't stand by and put this in the too hard basket and just be silent when that is often the easiest thing to do. That we acknowledge that there is so much we can and should and will do to raise awareness, to support and connect our community, and to make Moonee Valley the most inclusive community that it can be, so that all of our citizens feel valued, they feel respected, and they feel that they can make a contribution to our community.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor like to say? Councillor Cusack.
Thank you, Mayor. This is very important. Both the mover and the seconder of this motion have highlighted that. But there are many ways to look at what happens in a community when its basic tenets around providing safety, health and so on like that collapse. And they collapse for many, many different reasons. But when they collapse because of discrimination, when they collapse because of unfair activities and separating people out from each other because that is just a convenient way of structuring a world that I want to have, is wrong. And what we're asking the people of Moonee Valley to think about is to come and follow this council and to be brave enough to support with us what it means to be supportive of people who are diverse. People are diverse because of birth, health, sex, education, poverty, and any other number of things. Disability, sorry, I've left that out as well. So let's think about it. The statement is, Council acknowledges that Moonee Valley is home to people from all over the world. Communities of diverse cultural backgrounds, faith, ethnicities, languages contribute to Moonee Valley as a thriving community. We believe this diversity gives great strength and vibrancy to Moonee Valley. Racism and discrimination undermine the health and well-being of individuals, families and communities and prevent people from participating fully in everyday life. I might say their right to participate in everyday life fully. We stand together against racism and discrimination and we ask our community to do the same. Sentiments that have given strength to this, not Moonee Valley, not just Victoria, but have rung the bell through the ages. This bloody country was ultimately became a decent country after a convict passed because people stood for these things. And these sorts of values are sensible, common sense, well-grounded values that recognise that the way forward is when everybody goes forward. Even the weakest and the most potentially forgotten people are the ones that we need to be working with to take forward in it. So there's no excuse now, Moonee Valley, you're up and racing.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor to say a few words? Councillor Gauci-Marucci.
Just briefly, Councillor Cusack stole the thunder. I was going to read the statement because no one else had yet. But just to again reiterate the comments of my fellow councillors, I'm so incredibly proud that this week we are able to develop and release this statement. I'm so incredibly proud of the community which we all get to live, work and play in. We are so culturally rich, and the diversity statement just underpins, importantly, so much of the fantastic work that council and our officers and our community already do in this area. So I think it's really important to remember the work that's already being done, and the work that will be done as part of these initiatives just continues to be underpinned by this statement. And it's really exciting for us as councillors to be able to celebrate the differences that make this such a wonderful municipality, and for us to continue to work together so that we can ensure everyone has those great experiences.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other Councillor Sorais?
Yeah, just really to endorse what the other councillors have said, but also just to note how lucky we are in this municipality of our diversity. I don't think there's any other municipality across Melbourne Metropolitan that has such culture and diversity that this council has, and how lucky we are that we've got all the diversity of different fantastic food places and restaurants, and just the embracing of different community groups within our municipality of the different backgrounds and nationalities and things. So I guess it's a win-win for us in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor? Councillor Nation, would you like to close?
I will, and I won't do it in a voice as well as Councillor Cusack, but I will reread the statement, our Moonee Valley City Council standing together and supporting diversity statement. Council acknowledges that Moonee Valley is home to people from all over the world. communities of diverse cultural backgrounds, faiths, ethnicities and languages contribute to Moonee Valley as a thriving community. We believe this diversity gives great strength and vibrancy to Moonee Valley. Racism and discrimination undermine the health and well-being of individuals, families and communities, and prevents people from participating fully in everyday life. We stand together against racism and discrimination, and we ask our community to do the same.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Council Report 9.7 tonight centred on page 116 as entitled Response to Notice of Motion 2018-03 Request for the Introduction of the Moonee Valley City Council Waste Calendar. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Sharp.
Could I please move the officer's recommendation?
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gauci-Marucci. Councillor Sharp, would you like to speak to the item?
Double-sided printing.
Sorry,
Councillor, can you
had my
just,
notes.
councillors, if you are proposing an amendment, please be clear with your wording, as we do not have a live version of it with us right now. So be very clear. As you can see, the screen's not up.
No, that's okay. I'm just leaving it as it is. I don't have an amendment for this, yep. Look, personally, I would really like to see the waste calendar continue in its previous form, which I believe was valued by our community. Based on the figures in this report, in the grand scheme of things, the costs really weren't huge, but I do understand the financial environment that we are currently in. I guess I'm just really disappointed that the format of the calendar was changed and now effectively our residents will miss out.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gauci-Marucci.
Just to endorse Councillor Sharp's comments and to reiterate to the community that obviously this is a decision we've made for this year and that we're taking forward to next year. If at this point next year or in future years from now, it is something that people want to see back, that's feedback you should feed up to us through communication channels and budget processes. But equally, we're developing all these exciting, cool new apps and things that you should be able to get a reminder on your mobile of the day you need to take your bin out anyway. So,
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor like to speak to the item? Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor. Obviously support the officer's recommendation and think page 118 where it lists what the environmental impact that producing the calendar in its existing form would have, which is equivalent of around 5.4 tonnes of recycled paper, equivalent to felling about 20 trees, or around 8 megawatt hours of energy use, which is enough to power an average home for a year and 800 kilometres driven during distribution, creating about 7 tonnes of carbon emissions. It's equivalent to around 6 megalitres of water used, which is enough to fill more than 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools. And although the calendar is printed on recycled paper, it does create almost a ton of landfill waste. Particularly given it is the waste calendar, there is that underlying irony that we probably need to ensure that we look at our own wastage. I probably am guilty, like many people, of just not being the first one to put my bin out, so I just copy everyone else. But as Councillor Gauci-Marucci stated, this decision was made for both a financial but an environmental reason. There are plenty of new ways that we can inform residents which night is bin night, and also whether or not the yellow or green bin goes out.
I tend to agree with you, Councillor Nation, because living in my street, everyone looks to see what the mayor's bins put out, and it puts a lot of pressure on me. So even I have to look at this calendar as well too. So I do understand what you're saying. Would any other councillor like to say? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to councillors for their comments on this all-important calendar. I take the point that the app is an innovation that we can go down and the younger members of our community who are capable of using the modern technology, be it mobile phone or iPad, etc., will be well placed. However, we do have a fairly elderly population within Moonee Valley as well, who are not technology savvy, who do not have the ability to use these devices, let alone own one, and in which case they are never going to have the access to this information. And I applaud Councillor Sharp for moving this motion for their sake, so that they know when to put their bin out, because without it, they're never going to. They're either going to copy, as the Mayor rightly does, lead the way in his street, but unfortunately his street does not have all the elderly people in Moonee Valley, and they can't copy his direction. So I guess we probably don't need a multitude of them, and maybe we look at how we distribute them to the elderly citizens, the Probus clubs, etc., who are probably more in need of this, so we don't have to produce a mega ton of waste, as Councillor Nation points out, and a swimming pool of, I'm not sure what you referred to there, but there was a swimming pool of something, and so I'll just go down that path. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Mayor. I think it is really important to clarify that there has still been a waste calendar produced. So people still do have that information, because Councillor Lawrence is obviously right. There are people who don't access our website or other technology. So there is definitely a waste calendar, and in some ways I actually think it's probably easier to read and understand the information than the previous calendar. So for me, the things I loved about the previous calendar were the photos, and I've got one that was produced some years ago with a whole range of historical photos and heritage buildings, and it was actually a beautiful document. But if we look at both the cost in the environment where we are looking at every turn to try and save money, and if we look at the environmental impacts, I think for me that's why, on balance, we've still got the information available, absolutely. And if anyone didn't get a copy that they can stick on their fridge, obviously they're more than happy to, or more than welcome to come and contact us. But I just think if we look at the environmental and the financial impacts, we have provided a form that people can use, and we should stick with that for the time being.
Just a point of clarification for myself. Where can people obtain these calendars from right now? From customer service?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, they're available through customer service.
Okay, so for the benefit of our live streaming audience, if you have elderly residents who are requiring one of these calendars, they can come down to customer service and get one and get a calendar for customer service. Thank you. Any other councillor would like to say a few words? Councillor Cusack.
I just want to, I suppose, look at this through a different lens, or and say, first of all, I suppose, I support the motion, because in a way we don't talk about waste very well in Moonee Valley all of the time. We are a very, very good council at organising things around waste, and we've got all sorts of fabulous awards, national and local and state-based awards for the efforts that we've made. But in a sense, the question of waste and how we tackle it is one that's been making the front page of all of the papers of recent times. It's also about a heightened awareness of lots of people in the community about where are we going to. And having sat through very recent discussions around budget and so on like that, it is one of those areas that is always at the forefront of councillors' minds, if for no other reason than the costs. But what we probably need to do is think of this very small example as one of those ways to transition to smarter waste management things that happen both in our homes and in our very local areas, and to get the best out of all of that. Now, we can all worry about the big picture, but it's how we do the little picture. So there's things in this that we need to also balance through this. And so I would like to think that if we are going through the looking at how our paper-based calendar gets out and about, that we are vigilant as a council and in constantly reviewing the value of that and how that changes and evolves. As Councillor Lawrence points out, not everybody uses a digital approach to their lives. Well, that's fine, but more and more people are, and the changes are occurring more and more, and we will be able to get to that in a better, down the track, we will be able to get to a better arrangements. So in keeping with that, I'm happy to go back to an expanded version of our calendar on the basis that it's a transition, that on the basis that we are doing a constant review and that things will change and that we don't need to be left in the one position standing with a calendar forever when in fact everything else has moved on.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Sorais.
Just something to note that it's nearly about a $60,000 saving that we've gone through this process of doing that, and what that's enabled us to do through our comms department is to create online news and social media campaigns to educate and inform residents about a range of topics, I guess, which includes our waste reduction and things like that. So it's sort of been an opportunity to expand in other areas as well as a cost-saving exercise.
Thank you, Councillor Sorais. Any other councillor? Councillor Sharp, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Council Report 9.8 on tonight's agenda is on page 121 and is entitled Be Friendly State, Motion to the MAV State Council and to the National Assembly of Local Government in Canberra. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Sharp.
Move the officer's recommendation.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Byrne. Councillor Sharp, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you. Well, I'm very pleased to be talking about this motion. I think it's a fantastic initiative. Everybody loves the bees, except obviously when they sting you, but they're amazing little creatures that we really need to do everything we can to sustain and ensure they thrive. It was basically the program has basically come about from a number of swarms that were moved last year that were found in our municipality. And we now have the hives on top of our roofs collecting honey, and I've just built my first batch of honey. It's in my tray in there, so I'm certainly looking forward to getting that home and trying that out. And I also found in my tray, as every other council would too, a bee hive.
Hotel.
I'm looking forward to finding out how I use those. Well, it looks like a hive. I've got to work out. I asked for some instructions. But so I'm looking forward to seeing how that works actually, and I know that there is a introduction to beekeeping forum in a couple of weeks, which I believe is sold out. So I'm certainly very happy and looking forward to presenting this motion to the MAV State Council, and I assume you as the Mayor will be taking it to the National Assembly of Local Government.
Absolutely.
But I must congratulate yourself, Mr Mayor, and the Deputy Mayor on your pushing of this program to get the exposure that we've gotten so far. We've had visitors from other councils and the Minister, which I'm sure Deputy Byrne will talk about. But we're getting great exposure from this fantastic initiative, and I think it's really fantastic, and I think it'd be a great place, it's just a great idea that we need to continue to push, because how good would it be to, Victoria the place to be? I don't know who sorted that up, but it's great. Probably yourself, was it, Councillor John? Thank you.
Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is just such a fabulous project, and I think that, like yourself, we could probably talk about it all day. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. I wanted to thank the Aberfeldy and Strathmore men's sheds, who are helping building and assembling the bee hives and hotels, and the Crown Street Knit and Natter groups who crochet the toy bees that often come along with the jars of honey. And yes, as Councillor Sharp alluded to, John and I have been working on quite a few politicians further up the ranks to try to get them to come out and see our bees. And the interest that they have in the bees, we build multi-million-dollar facilities and sometimes struggle to get them out. However, the bees is a ticket, a ticket to Moonee Valley. And it's sometimes interesting how these projects really catch on and how great they are. A couple of weeks ago, we had the Minister for Local Government, Marlene Carews, come out to the incinerator gallery and have a look at the bees. So would like to thank her, as we did for obviously coming out. We've applied for a grant to be able to hopefully grow this program into the future into other municipalities. It's just one of those really good good news stories, and we need these in council sometimes. And there's Councillor Sypek with his with the jar of honey, which is great. I would also like to thank all of the volunteers and staff again who have helped put this together, and Naomi and Pedro are absolute champions in this space. If you ever want to know anything about a bee, you can speak to either of these two staff members, because I've been to the incinerator gallery quite a few times with them, and there has never been a question that has stumped them on bees and what they do and what they're for, and it's just fabulous. So all the best, Narelle, with taking this to the MAV. I'm sure it will go down an absolute buzz. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Must be getting to the dad jokes now, I think. Any other councillor like to say a few words? No? Councillor Cusack.
After that conclusion, Councillor Byrne, I'm not sure now. I can understand your motivation for supporting the bees, though, because they're black and yellow. I just wanted to say that this is an interesting example of where local action has actually got the capacity to scale up a response, just not at a statewide, but also at a national level. And as the explanatory notes that go with this motion that will go to the MAV talk about what it means. It's not, so we're talking about the environmental chain, and we're talking about how pollination and so on like that occurs. So any of us who have got an interest in the environment have a deep interest in making sure that that bees are actually protected in a way that makes them able to continue to do their vital work as part of the chain. We also know that through research and also record keeping of recent times of the dramatic loss of bee numbers and the dramatic downturn in production of pollen and therefore honey over the whole of Australia. And so there is an economic downturn in this, and there is a real imperative that we all pick up on it. And so, and whether it's employment for apiarists, but it also goes right to the shop floor in your local areas. So well done in taking this forward and bringing it up. And I would think that we could do something quite extraordinary, and it's an interesting example of communities reacting to even things like climate change. So it's a really fundamental thing. And just a final note that the Essendon Community Gardens have had 3 hives going for quite some time. And they're an interesting barometer of how the weather is going. And so last year we got very little honey out of those. And this year we've had a nice little crop, and everybody's getting a few jars and so on the side. So while the council has got its initiative going, the community once again has been pumping it on the side anyway. Cheers.
Thank you. Any other councillor? Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor. This whole program is amazing at how it's taken off, and I remember probably about 18 to 24 months ago when we had a beehive down in Clarinda Park on Park Street, which was preventing kids from going there and playing there. And the first thought of a couple of people that contacted council were to exterminate, get rid of the bees. And it was the forward thinking of our council staff who said, no, we're going to engage a local apiarist and actually relocate that beehive. I was deputy mayor at the time, and I remember doing an interview on 774, on ABC radio, on behalf of the mayor, and there was the joke that Moonee Valley could start producing its own honey. And then in the space of 18 months, we are producing our own honey. And not only does it have environmental impacts, but it also, as you said, is a great little bit of PR for our city. And it's amazing how little programs like this can have such a good community buy-in and a good buy-in further up the chain. I don't have a pun to finish on, sorry, and I probably won't be able to take that home because I live with two. I know. Oh, because I live with two vegans, and we're not allowed to have honey because apparently it's not vegan. So unfortunately, I might have to donate mine. It won't be allowed back in the house, but otherwise, I think this is a fantastic program, and commendations to everyone who's been involved.
Terrific. Any other councillor say a few words? Yes, Councillor Marshall.
I just wanted to touch on the same point as Councillor Nation in some ways, and for anyone who hasn't seen the various documentaries out there about the consequences and the vanishing of the bees, and there's a few, it is definitely worth a watch, because you see how it could play out if the bees were out of our ecosystem, the dire consequences of that.
2 years.
Well, it's something, we're doing our little part in Moonee Valley, but for me, it is just in that really short period of time, that change in attitude, that the first instinct was to get rid of them. And now in a short period of time, although there was, I think it was one of the councils in New South Wales recently that had mass extermination of bees, and you think so much of this is about education. And if we can do our little bit in Moonee Valley, I would be very happy. Sorry.
I'll just say a few words before we close. The bee hotel that we're talking about, if the camera wants to focus in, this is what you class as a bee hotel, and you actually hang it in your backyard. Now, the European honeybee, the ones that produce the honey, they can't live in this because they like to live in colonies, whereas the bees that come into here are usually the Australian home bees, which is called the blue-banded bee, and they prefer this solitary life, and they're the ones that will pollinate your backyard, your vegetable patch. So, and they've got very, very small stingers, so like you can barely see these bees, but they're the ones that make your tomatoes go from this to this, and that's what you want. So, and our MedShed produced this, so please, I encourage everyone down the live streaming to go and have a look at our men's shed and have a look at these little bee hotels and get one for yourself and put it in your backyard. And as Molly Meldrum would say, do yourself a favour. So, thank you. Councillor Sharp, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Notices of motion. Councillors, next on item of business on agenda tonight is motions, and we have 6 notices of motions listed tonight. Therefore, I call on Councillor Lawrence to present his first notice of motion entitled Australia Day 26th of January Confirmation. Councillors.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll read the motion. Take notice that the ordinary meeting of Council to be held 27th of March 2018 is my intention to move. Moonee Valley City Council confirms that the 26th of January be recognised as Australia Day. And 2, Moonee Valley City Council confirms its commitment to supporting the citizenship ceremonies each 26th of January, Australia Day.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder? I'll second that. Councillor Serace. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Australia Day, 26th of January, is a day to reflect on what it means to be Australian and to celebrate contemporary Australia and to acknowledge our history, and be that British, German, Italian, Greek or any other nationality. In contemporary Australia, Australia Day, January 26th, is marked as a presentation of Australian of the Year awards on Australia Day Eve, announcement of the Australia Day honours list and addresses by the Governor-General, Prime Minister, etc. It's the official public holiday in every state and territory, with community festivals, concerts, citizenship ceremonies, celebrated in large and small communities and cities around the nation, at federal government level, state government level, and of course at local government level. Australia Day, January 26, has become the biggest annual civic event in Australia. The first recorded Australia Day celebration were held on the 26th of January 1808 to mark the 20 years of the First Fleet arriving at Sydney Cove. And then Lachlan Macquarie, the first Australian governor, to hold the first official Australia Day on 26th of January in 1818. This was to mark the 30th year. Australia Day, 26th of January, was originally called Foundation Day in the early part of the 19th century and was typically marked by sporting events including horse racing and boat races and celebrations. The first colony to declare Australia Day as a public holiday was New South Wales, being the first colony in our continent, and they in 1838 they celebrated the 50th anniversary. By 1888, all the colonies in Australia at that time, not necessarily, this was before Federation, declared a public holiday and celebrated Australia Day. However, it wasn't until the 1940s that the 26th of Australia was agreed upon by all states as the proper day to celebrate. On Australia Day, January 26th, we celebrate all things we love about Australia: our land, our diverse people, our sense of fair go, our lifestyle, our democracy, our freedoms, but particularly we enjoy and celebrate our people and their diversity. And as we've only just passed that motion just before, I think that's a very apt thing to be celebrating. Thank you.
Is that it, Councillor Lawrence? No. Councillor Sorais.
Yes, my reason for seconding the motion from Councillor Lawrence was, as the motion reads, it's a confirmation. Whilst this is a federal issue, just like we've dealt with other federal issues at this council table, it's actually just confirming that Moonee Valley confirms that the 26th of January be recognised as Australia Day, and that Moonee Valley Council confirms its commitment to supporting citizenship ceremonies on the 26th of January. Councillor Lawrence has elaborated on the reasons behind why the 26th of January and how Australia Day has been derived. So therefore I support the motion in relation to where Council stands in relation to confirming those details.
Would any other council like to speak? Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor. I will not be supporting this motion, noting that the setting of the date for Australia Day is the responsibility of the federal government, that this motion contains no advocacy element in regards to supporting campaigns to either keep or change the date of Australia Day, and that it also, should the date of Australia Day one day be changed by the federal government, would actually see Moonee Valley City Council celebrating Australia Day out of step with the rest of the country. The date of Australia Day is clearly a contentious matter and is not something that we have been asked by the federal government to provide feedback on. If and when the time came that the federal government did ask residents or councils about keeping or changing the date, is a time when council may consider advocacy on this matter or taking a stance. As such, any motion to debate the exact date of Australia Day at this point is completely immaterial. And I would also suggest that such irrelevant debate around these chambers would be at odds with the significant work our council has completed in the space of reconciliation. Less than 3 years ago, 9 councillors sat around these chambers and moved this document, which is our reconciliation policy. We as a council made 3 major commitments in this adopted policy. 1, respect. Council respects the place of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first inhabitants and custodians of this land. 2, recognition. Council recognises the unique contribution of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to Australia in the past and present. Council recognises the past injustices and current inequities experienced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as a result of the colonisation. 3, relationships. Council will work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to build partnerships and create opportunities that will reduce inequalities. As such, this motion is not in line with any of these three major commitments, and it creates divisive debate on a matter well outside our control. If the federal government puts the decision regarding the date of Australia Day to the people of Australia, or if it asks council for our input, then I'm happy to sit around and debate the issue. In the meantime, I don't think there is much relevance of having debate on this matter within these chambers.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Any other councillor to say a few words? Councillor Cusack.
Well, I'm happy to follow Councillor Nation and thank him for his debate, the points that he's made in respect of this motion that's before us. I noted with some sadness that Councillor Lawrence at no stage in his discussion about this motion acknowledged anything to do with Australian Aboriginal or Aboriginal Australia, which is deeply saddening. I think that 1788, while 26th of January 1788 was very important for those people who had made landfall not in where they were going to go but by accident around the corner, was an interesting thing. If we're truly going to try and find a day about what Australia stands for, is a landing to create a colony that's based on convict notions and the getting rid of people out of a country to help something that was happening on the other side of the globe, a really important point for us. I don't know what Australia Day is, when it should happen or whatever. I do understand, though, that it is important to continue to celebrate our diversity in all ways, and that this motion has this horrible potential to create division. And why do we need to have a motion on our table as a council that is going to do that? I think back, as Councillor Nation put it, we could end up quite casually out of step with the rest of the country if there was ever any change, because like Queensland, that adopted the Queen of Queensland in its constitution just in case Australia ever became a republic. So therefore we would have one state in our country that was somehow tied to London. We've talked at some length about the need to think our way through this, how a debate that might be respectful of Aboriginal Australia and its needs can occur. I think Councillor Nation put it in a good context, that if there is a will and a strength from all of our political leaders in the federal parliament to do something and to change it, that's the right time to actually get this debate up and running. But to saddle people of Moonee Valley with a contentious date for all time and to suggest that we have to move down that track that way is strange. We have the capacity to run a citizenship ceremony on the 26th of January any time we bloody well want, frankly.
Would you like some extra time, Councillor?
Oh, no, not really. But I'm quite happy to leave it go at that. And I'm saddened, I think, that we would have a motion like this before us as a council.
Thank you, Councillor. Would any other... Councillor Gauci-Marici.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would just like to echo the comments of my fellow councillors, but particularly the piece about the motion not being required. This motion is just superfluous. The date is set by the federal government. And more than that, the intention of this motion is contrary to what is expected of us under the Local Government Act in regard to fostering community cohesion under section 3D2F, and in regard to undertaking functions relating to the peace and order of our municipal district under section 3E1H. No one disagrees that there are views on both sides of this argument. What we do disagree with is the need for a motion which is not only superfluous but is just inflammatory. So we can celebrate Australia Day on whatever date the federal government sets in a way that not only welcomes our newest citizens, but one which also acknowledges and respects the history that we have and will continue to celebrate. It particularly saddens me in a week that we celebrate our diversity. There could be a move to divide and undermine all the good work and the positive relationships that we do have in our community. We have incredibly good relationships with our elders and our Wurundjeri community in Moonee Valley, and I don't think that there is any need for us to try and push something so inflammatory as to create division. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor to say a few words? Councillor Marshall.
Mayor, Councillor Lawrence gave a version of history before. Let me give another version of history, because let's think for a moment about the events that followed 26 January 1788. And I have to always, I don't know whether I feel bemused or what I feel when I read about the polls that show that the majority of people don't actually know why the 26th of January is chosen to celebrate Australia Day. So let's think about the death and the displacement that occurred for the first people of Australia who had inhabited Australia for thousands and thousands of years. And the deaths that occurred through massacre are well documented, as are the many deaths that occurred through the introduction of diseases such as smallpox. And in a very small period of time, the population of Indigenous people was decimated through these. Let's think, if we're reflecting on our history, about the long history of the exploitation and abuse of Indigenous people as workers. Let's think about the prohibitions against Indigenous people celebrating their culture. And let's think about the forced removal of children from their families, the stories and the intergenerational consequences of which were outlined in such detail in the Bringing Them Home report. Let's think about the displacement of Indigenous people from their land and the disconnect that was forced upon them with their customs. And let's reflect on the fact that the High Court of Australia in 1992 in the Mabo decision recognised that the concept of terra nullius as it applied to Australia was totally a falsehood. And the High Court recognised the concept of native title and the pre-existence of very deep Indigenous laws and customs. Now, let's think about the current history of the current day of our Indigenous populations. And to this day, I will, sorry, Mayor, I should have asked up front. The continued vulnerability and inequity that exists for Australia's first people, the high rates of unemployment, the high levels of disability, and the poor health outcomes that still exist. Indigenous people are twice as likely to die from heart attacks, over 10 times as likely to have coronary heart disease. The life expectancy of Indigenous people is about 10 years less than non-Indigenous Australians. So if you think about all of these things that have flowed from that date, it might help provide some understanding as to why some people mightn't feel in the mood to celebrate. And for me, when I think about this excerpt from the report in relation to Indigenous deaths in custody, this really sums up for me so much about how I feel. All over the world, when communities have traumatic experiences, there are long-term consequences. Their children and grandchildren are affected, and depending on whether and how wrongdoings are acknowledged and continuing problems are addressed, the trauma tracks down the generations. Australians of today are not directly responsible for what happened in the past, but it is part of our shared history as Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. And together, we are responsible for what happens in the future. And I have to just express my sadness, as other councillors have, that in the wake of Cultural Diversity Week, and on a night where we have celebrated diversity and inclusiveness, we've talked about racism and the harms that come from it, that on a night such as this, a councillor has chosen to go down what is, in my opinion, a provocative and an unnecessarily divisive path such as this. I'm certainly not buying into this stunt at all, and frankly, I'm getting sick of these stunts, and I will not be supporting this motion. And Mayor, I have to reflect, so many people say that they hate councils, So many people say get rid of local government, and nights like tonight and issues like this, sometimes I can't help but wonder if they're right.
Thank you. Councillor, any other councillor would like to say a few words? Councillor Sharp.
Could I ask the mover and the seconder if they would potentially entertain a change to the wording? Or an amendment, I should ask for?
Can you be precise and clear with your wording, because we don't have a live version?
No, sorry, I will. Point 1, Moonee Valley City Council confirms its commitment... sorry, I'm reading point 2. Moonee Valley City Council confirms that that Australia Day will be celebrated on the date as set by the federal government. And point 2, Moonee Valley City Council confirms its commitment to supporting citizenship ceremonies on the date as set by the federal government.
Councillor Lawrence, would you be in agreement with that?
Could I just have some clarity as to what is the reason for the change?
If the federal government decides to change the date, currently obviously 26th of January is Australia Day, but if there was obviously concern with the date being set, and if the federal government changes it, we've got the date here, so that's why I'm flagging if the federal government changes the date.
Just on reflection, I think that's a formal amendment that you're actually proposing rather than informal, so I'll be requiring a seconder for your formal alteration. So, do I have a seconder for Councillor Sharp's amendment? Councillor Gauchi-Marucci. Councillor Sharp, would you like to speak to your amendment?
Just as I said earlier, I guess there was obviously concern from councillors regarding if the federal government changed the date. Look, Australia Day is a fantastic day, and I think we need to think of it as a positive day, and we need to get from council, you know, my council hat on, we really need to not only confirm our support to our community, but also obviously to the Indigenous members of our community and the Wurundjeri tribe. Council's gone to great lengths over the last few years, a number of years, to foster a respectful relationship between ourselves, and we've certainly had a great relationship, and I think that we can continue to foster that and make that all-encompassing. And I know, Mr Mayor, you've had some great ideas about how to involve and highlight the Indigenous people, particularly on Australia Day for the coming years. And I was speaking to council officers last night about it, and I know that plans are to have a more, I guess the word's inclusive, but a more focus, probably focus is a better word, much more of a focus on our Indigenous population and much more of a focus on our past history. And but all that coming together to whatever day is set, in stone for Australia Day, whatever day that ends up being, it's a celebration of all of us. Nothing dividing, nothing's meant to be divisive. It's just a celebration of all of us, and I think that we've got a long way to go on it. But from what I can understand, and I know you've been, as I said, certainly thinking about it, but our officers are certainly planning on changing things over the next few years, and which, from my understanding, is going to be certainly be positive, certainly not negative.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. So just to be crystal clear, can you just read out your alternative again?
Moonee Valley City Council confirms that Australia Day will be celebrated on the date set by the federal government, and Moonee Valley City Council confirms its commitment to supporting citizenship ceremonies on the date as set by the federal government.
Thank you.
Sorry,
a point of clarification?
As per Australia Day?
Mr. Lawrence, are you actually asking for a point
I'm
of
just wanting clarification on the
Moonee Valley City Council confirms that Australia Day will be celebrated on the date as set by the federal government.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Gauchi-Marucci.
I think, as I stated previously, the need for us to have a motion is somewhat superfluous. I think us reconfirming our support for whatever date the government sets is somewhat more amenable.
So I'm happy to be somewhat more amenable. I still think we don't necessarily need to be debating this at all, but if it is a way to placate everyone and ensure that we move forward in a positive manner to the people in our community who will actually be impacted by this, then let's make sure we move forward in a positive manner and actually be inclusive and diverse and celebrate the history past as well as the history present, and make sure that we include those people who are most impacted by what is the current date of Australia Day.
Thank you, Councillor. Will any other Councillor Nation?
I will speak to this amendment because I continue to feel that there is nothing this council can possibly gain from confirming its support of Australia Day other than to attempt to divide what may be a very small percentage of our community, but a very much valued little percentage of our community, as we just referred to in our diversity statement. I've got a friend who's of Indian heritage and has recently just bought out in the suburb of Truganina, and quite often chat about his heritage and a few other things. And I asked him if he knew what Truganina meant. When I was down on Moonee Island, just after Christmas, there's this plaque at the top of the hill, and it mentions the story of Truganini. Truganini was the last full-blooded Tasmanian Aboriginal that lived. Her mother killed by sailors when they arrived, her uncle shot by a soldier, her sister abducted by sealers, and her fiancé, he had his hands chopped off by timber cutters who then threw him overboard at sea. This woman was then sexually abused for a long period. And she persevered. She lived to 63. And we're talking about a period when she was born in somewhat around 1812. And I said to him, and he didn't gain his citizenship here in Moonee Valley, but at another council, and he didn't gain it on Australia Day. But I said, in terms of sensitivities to members of our own Indigenous community, you have to understand that while Australia Day can be a fantastic celebration of multiculturalism, there are legacies from times past that hurt people and hurt people to this day. And the naming of Truganina after Truganini is a constant reminder about what took place to get us to where we are today. And there's been a lot of people that have sacrificed, and a lot of people killed, and entire generations wiped out. So if we're going to sit around these chambers and we're going to reconfirm Australia Day for the sake of diversity, that I want nothing to do with that message, because it just sends a divisive message to our community.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor to say a few words? Councillor Cusack.
Councillor Sharp, I don't know what to make of the amendment, mate. I know that you're attempting to pour some oil on troubled waters, but as we said in the earlier part of the debate, that the federal government sets Australia Day, whether it's 26th of January or any other day, and it's gazetted as part of the public story and position of the whole of the country. So it's irrelevant whether we support it or not, it's going to happen. I also am concerned that it actually gives some air or support to the previous motion, which many councillors around this table had indicated strong opposition to, and for the very reasons that, again, Councillor Nation has alluded to. It just occurs to me that the 26th of January in a multicultural society of Australia, with its great celebration of diversity, maybe we should be celebrating the 26th of January as Indian Independence Day, which is what it is. and when they threw off the yoke of colonial rule. It's interesting that we don't celebrate throwing off the yoke of colonial rule on the 26th of January. In fact, we're embracing it. 1st of January, the turn of the 1900s, is the day that we might be thinking about in terms of Australia becoming a country where all of the states combined is maybe an appropriate day. Or even to take up Sean Micallef's rather sarcastic comment that why don't we just turn it to the 29th of February so we can have this argument every 4 years. I don't know. But the point is that the 26th of January is a really sad day in Australia. The amendment is not going to change the federal government position, and there is no need for this council to be affirming one day or another. That is not our role. What we do and what we can do in an Australian Day context is acknowledge our diversity, acknowledge that many people will love to become Australian citizens on a day that talks about being Australian. But we also don't want to be tied to a situation where this council is somehow again left in a position where we've got no particular feel for anything. We're tied to a situation where we're trying to lead the country or ultimately end up out of step. A couple of seconds, Mayor. And I'm not sure that it makes any difference, this amendment. And I think that while it's a good attempt, it doesn't work. And so I won't be supporting it, no way.
Any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Mayor. I appreciate what Councillor Sharp is trying to do and to, I suppose, try and find some compromise for this matter to not be so antagonistic and divisive as was intended, in my opinion. But for me, I'm almost tempted to move an amendment to say we acknowledge our support of Christmas Day, because that is how ridiculous this is. What us as Moonee Valley councillors sitting here say in relation to acknowledging our support or otherwise, so what? You know, I think we need to remember, because some councillors seem to be forgetting, we are local government councillors. If you want to be in state parliament, if you want to be in federal parliament, you know what, go and run at the November elections or whenever they are and fight those battles then. But what we should be focusing on is the stuff that came earlier, that inclusivity and making sure all our citizens feel welcomed, not having a ridiculous version of history which totally ignores the sufferings of so many people. I mean, how people can do that and sit there with such a stone heart, cold heart, and not acknowledge that is just astonishing to me. But I acknowledge that Councillor Sharp is trying to find a midpoint. Again, it just is ridiculous that we're even talking about this, and I can't support this proposed amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Will any other councillor say a few words? Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I can understand what Councillor Sharp was aiming to do, and I think on a paper it might not seem that bad to some people, but I certainly can't be supporting anything that would be putting Moonee Valley Council in the position to be supporting, celebrating January the 26th as Australia Day. We've just moved a cultural diversity statement, and the fact of the matter is that there are a significant amount of people within this municipality that will never be able to celebrate January 26th. And I just think tying those words in together and is not something that I'm happy to support. I didn't speak before. It was quite interesting to listening to the debate around the chamber on the substantive motion, but I just, in my opinion, I think it's just heartbreaking that even came into the chamber.
Thank you, Councillor. Will any other councillor say a few words? Councillor Sarace.
Just a couple of observations. From my perspective, we all understand the history as to what transpired on the 26th of January in relation to the Indigenous community, which is a tragedy. No one disputes that, no one denies that. Is that the actual date, though? Were there not people that arrived in Australia earlier that weren't registered and recognised as, and there possibly could have been? So really, what date is the real day for Australia Day to be celebrated? So I understand where Councillor Sharp is coming from with regards to saying that we would recognise and support whatever the federal government do. This is not the first time this council has sat around this table and debated a federal government issue. We went through this whole process when it came to the yes vote, and we sat down and we debated that. So it's not a first situation. There has been a precedent set. I concur with the comments in relation to the tragedies that have taken place with the Indigenous community, and yes, we do have a reconciliation policy. And when this matter came up sometime during last year, a statement was put out through the media with regards to our reconciliation policy. My understanding is that maybe this has been taken a little bit out of context as to what the intent of Councillor Lawrence was trying to achieve. I don't know, but I think, yes, it is a federal government issue. I think that it's something that, should it come around, I mean, we've been to a function where it's been stated that people embrace Australia Day because they love this country. So the positive side of whatever date it is that we celebrate Australia as this wonderful country that we live in. The unfortunate side of that is that this discussion about the 26th of January being the date that so many people that were inhabitants of this land were damaged, destroyed, crucified, if you want to put it that way, but absolutely indecently assaulted, and no one disputes that. And it is very sad and very tragic, but where this goes, I don't know.
Thank you, Councillor. Before we go to the vote, I'll just clarify what we're actually voting on. So Councillor Sharp's formal amendment is what we'll be voting on, and if Councillor Sharp's amendment fails, we then go straight back to the original notice of motion, and Councillor Lawrence will then close the debate, and then we'll re-vote again on Councillor Lawrence's original notice of motion. So, councillors, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? Oh, sorry. All those in favour?
Apologies. Councillor Surace, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Lawrence.
All those against?
Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Cusack.
All those abstaining?
Councillor Gauchi-Marici.
Okay, so we now go to the... That has failed. So we now go to the original notice of motion, and Councillor Lawrence, would you like to close the debate?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I could say some things that would probably only inflame some comments which I frankly have taken offence to be told that I have a cold heart and hardness of whatever, frankly just does not lend itself to good councillor relationships, and will only exacerbate the issues that probably already exist with some councillors in this chamber. However, getting back to the issue that we're talking about, I'd just like to make a closing debate about this, and if I could just continue.
Just as a, actually,
Point
sorry,
of clarification.
point of clarification. Whether that was a threat, or I'm not clear.
What was a threat, if I could have clarification?
The last statement that Councillor Lawrence made, just because it was unclear. Thanks, Mayor.
What was the last words that you said?
Just that there was mention of having a cold heart and to have hardness of character. I find that offensive.
Okay.
No, sorry, that was not the statement in question.
Could you...
Yes, it was in relation to further inflaming relationships about councillors and underlying issues. That was it. What is that a threat from Councillor Lawrence? I'm not.
I don't perceive it to be a threatening...
I was asked the person, sorry, Mayor.
Sorry.
Yeah, just in terms of obviously the intent of that statement from the person who made
Thank
it.
you. Was your intent threatening or on a personal nature?
Not at all. It was just stating some current circumstance.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Marshall, I'll make a ruling on it. I think
You're clarified.
you feel clarified, but I'll make a ruling on it. I don't think it was a threat or of any personal nature. I think it was just a statement that Councillor Lawrence was just grieving out what he felt as well. So please continue, Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Australia Day, as it is at January 26th, is about acknowledging and celebrating the contribution that every Australian makes to our contemporary and dynamic nation. From our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have been here for more than 65,000 years, to those who have lived here for generations, to those who have come here from all corners of the globe to call our country home. People who migrated halfway around the world, who were originally from Irish families, German families, English families, Scottish families, Italian families, Greek families, Chinese families, Indian families, Croatian families, Pacific Island families, New Zealand families, and many more countries. They have all come to Australia for a better Australian life. The marking of 26th of January is an important date, and I will ask for extra time, thank you, Mayor, since we were interrupted to start with. The marking of the 26th of January is an important date in Australia's history and has changed over time. Australia Day continues to be hugely popular, with 3 out of 4 Australians believing it has bigger meaning than beyond being just a day off. More than 2/3 of all Australians participate in Australia Day on January 26, attending events organised by the state.
Mayor.
Point of order.
This is a rebuttal. I'm not really sure how we're allowed to bring in new points into a rebuttal. Thank you.
I know it's a rebuttal, but he's not bringing in new points. He's actually closing the debate. So
No, Mr Mayor, he's bringing in statistics that we haven't had a chance to rebut in speeches ourselves.
that's fine. Councillor Lawrence, would you just retract the statement of the statements and just go
Well,
ahead?
I mean, we are talking about Australia Day, Mr Mayor, and if we can't talk about it in the full light of the statistics that exist, then we don't have any chance to...
Mayor, just a point of order. You have asked a councillor to retract a comment. A councillor has to retract a comment, so I would respectfully request you ask Councillor Lawrence to retract those comments again.
Thank you for interrupting while I was speaking.
Thank you.
If you could just retract the comments about the statements, because the rest of us haven't had a chance to actually observe those statements.
Okay. Which statement did I have to retract?
The statistics.
That 3 out of 4 Australians believe that Australia Day has a bigger meaning than a day off. Is that the one you want me to retract?
Correct.
And I gratefully retract it.
Thank you.
Our first people are the traditional custodians of our beautiful lands and waterways and have fundamental role in the great Australian story. We aspire to an Australia Day that can increasingly include recognition and celebration by all Australians of the importance of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders to our nation. January 26 has multiple meanings. It is Australia Day for some, and it is also a survival day for others. It is important that these views are respected and that collectively we have constructive conversations about this history and seek ways to move forward together as a nation, not in division but together in unity. Our National Day provides an opportunity to acknowledge and learn about our nation's past. It's time to reflect on and learn about our national journey, including ongoing history, traditions, cultures of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. For reconciliation, celebration, contribution and patriotism that is Australian, be that Aboriginal, be that Scottish, be that Italian, I for one are so very proud of it all. I believe we must retain Australia Day on January 26th each year, for to chop, change, switch is only a cause for greater argument, greater watering down of the importance of being Australian and of being a citizen of our great country, and will only create greater division among Australians. No matter what our background, we are now Australian, and we celebrate the fact on the 26th of January, Australia Day. I encourage councillors to continue in that ongoing support of our Australia Day, January 26th.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillors, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour of Councillor Lawrence's notice of motion?
Councillor Sorais, Councillor Lawrence.
All those against?
Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Cusack, Councillor Gauci-Marici.
All those abstaining?
Councillor Sharp.
Thank you. Councillors. 10.2, I call on Councillor Lawrence to present his second notice of motion entitled Plant and Tree Health. Councillors. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The motion is that Council requests a report on how trees and plants on Council land are faring in the current weather conditions and the steps taken to ensure plants remain healthy from now until June 2018.
Councillors, do I have a seconder? Councillor Sharp. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Rainfall has been below average in the last few months in Moonee Valley. We've had rainfall in Victoria in the past 7 days, however, it hasn't been a lot, and most of it has fallen north of the Great Divide, not in Essendon, Moonee Pond, Strathmore, etc. This motion is all about monitoring our small shrubs and trees and keeping a close look at what is happening with our rainfall, particularly in relation to our small shrubs and plants. Ongoing maintenance is not as costly as replacing plants that have died. Moonee Valley City Council spends over $500,000 each year on new trees and shrubs in our municipality. And I highly commend the Council for these initiatives, and something that I, as a councillor of Essendon, Aberfeldy and Strathmore in the Buckley ward, endorse 100%. However, let's not waste ratepayer money by just having these plants die. We need money to plant trees, but we also need to ensure that they are watered and do not die.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sharp.
Don't need to add anything further, quite self-explanatory.
Any other councillor? Councillor Marshall.
Oh, I never put up my hand, Mayor. Thank you for anticipating.
Yes, Pete.
So thank you to Councillor Lawrence for bringing this through the proper channels. That's appreciated. And I suppose this report reinforces to me the importance of evidence over anecdote, because if you look at the rainfall over that 2017-18 period, we have actually had higher rainfall than for the previous summer period. And certainly anecdotally, I wouldn't have thought that to be the case. But that's why, as I said, evidence is more important than anecdotes. I have mixed feelings about this motion in some ways, because obviously there are two things that Council rates highly on. In all of our surveys, we rate highly on our parks and gardens and our libraries. Those are things that we do very well. And I've done a whole range of things in my capacity as portfolio holder and as someone who is very much interested in our greenery to actually make sure that we have more greenery and that our existing greenery is supported. I think this, again, while I certainly appreciate the intent, this is something that officers do anyway. So I'm mindful about teaching them to suck eggs. I suppose, look, it's a report back on how our trees are faring. So in that regard, we've probably got the answer in a sense in this the officer comments here, but given it's just a report back, I'm happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Lawrence, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If we continue with the great work Moonee Valley does in greening our city, we must maintain constant vigilant approach to watering small shrubs and trees. If we have adequate rainfall over the next few months, I certainly would be very grateful, and that maintenance will obviously have to be far less. Finally, as I walk around our fine city on quite a lot of mornings on my normal 6K walk, and given that I've inherited my mother's green thumb, I did a small audit over the last 2 weeks to look at the small distressed trees and shrubs that were in the municipality. Aberfeldy Park, dead tree. Clorinda Park.
Mr Mayor.
These are not...
Sorry, point of order, and I'm sorry to be a stickler for the rules again, but this is the rebuttal. I think it's great you've got this, but this is probably should have come up in your first speech, but you can make the ruling, Mr Mayor.
I will actually allow it this time because I do like trees and shrubs myself, so I will let this one go through.
Mr Mayor, that's not the point of it. We're just talking about governance in terms of how meetings are run and not just what you like trees. That's not the point of what I'm bringing up.
All right. Councillor Lawrence, would you stick to the issue?
Well, this is the issue as far as I see it, Mr Mayor. If the councillors don't want to hear the anecdotal evidence as it stands...
Point of order, Mr Mayor, that is not what I said. It just doesn't come in a rebuttal.
Yeah, I suppose I'm asking you to refrain from introducing new evidence.
I guess if we go back to my original wording, I was looking at the maintenance of plants that have died. Now, if I have to, and those that are in need of maintenance. Now, if that is new evidence, then I would like to know why, Mr Mayor.
You said you did your own self-audit. Once again, the rest of the councillors didn't have the privilege of looking at your self-audit.
I'm walking with me if they wish any morning, and I'm happy to show them.
I'm just querying what your horticultural experiences are too.
Well, I look at trees, and if they're brown, they're obviously distressed.
Okay, well, some trees do go brown when they're distressed.
Yes.
And some trees
and that's
do
what
do that
this whole
as a part
motion
of
is
their-
about,
as a
Mr
part
Mayor.
of their normal cycle.
I mean, if councillors want to frustrate the issue of looking after their municipality,
Councillor
then...
Gauci Marucci.
Point of clarification, Mr Mayor.
Sure.
Maybe Ms Pope could explain what the purpose of including a speech is.
I'll reference the actual meeting protocol. The meeting protocol does provide that in exercising the right of reply, the mover should refrain from introducing fresh material. That's the terminology used.
Could we have some clarification as to what is fresh material in relation to dead plants?
Like your audit. That's a...
No, Councillor Lawrence, sorry, the meeting protocol doesn't actually define that any further than as I've advised here.
So the Mayor, what is your ruling?
My ruling is now, please don't produce new evidence, just talk to the issue.
Okay, well, I'll just put these aside, these 20 plants that are in distressed state, and I'll just leave it at that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillors, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Now, I call on now Councillor Byrne to present her notice of motion entitled Park Run Course. Councillor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just one moment whilst I get up here. Okay. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to take notice that at the ordinary council of meeting tonight, it is my intention to move that the council requests a report to the ordinary meeting of council on the 8th of May 2018 investigating 1, suitable 5-kilometre walking/running paths within the municipality that would cater for small active events such as parkrun, and 2, the costs associated with improving paths to increase accessibility for wheelchairs and prams and potential timeframes to do this.
So you're just asking for a report, are you, Councillor?
Yes, that's all.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Marshall. Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So Parkrun organise free weekly 5-kilometre time runs all around the world. They are open to everyone. As I said before, they're free, they're safe and they're easy to take part in. All you need to do is sign up and get your barcode. These events take place in pleasant parkland surroundings and encourage people of every ability to take part, from walkers or those taking their first steps in running to Olympians, juniors, those in a wheelchair to those with more experience. It's a bit of a phenomenon at the moment, but it has been going on for some time. Just some basic stats behind this. There's been over 4.5 million runs all over the world, with almost 40,000 events in 287 locations. For those runners that are around us, the average run time is 32 minutes for 5 kilometres. More locally, which would be Maribyrnong's course, there's been 189 events with over 4,000 different runners, with the biggest attendance being 274 people. and about 133,000 kilometres run.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Marshall.
Sorry.
You nodded at me and I thought, okay.
Oh no, I was just because I just not sure how many.
Sorry.
I want to make sure that I include it all in my first speech. So as wonderful as this is, in the not too distant future, Maribyrnong will be at saturation point. For anyone who knows the course, there's a pinch point right towards the start of the course, which has which there's been a couple of close encounters with bikes. This notice of motion fits in perfectly with our health and wellbeing plan, and I believe I would not be fulfilling my role as leisure portfolio holder if I did not set us up on the right path to think about the future of Moonee Valley having our own parkrun course. I'd like to make it clear that I'm not starting a parkrun. I'm simply ensuring that when an enthusiastic parkrunners come knocking, which they will, we are ready to go and can help provide a suitable course that is as accessible to as many people as possible. I do find it somewhat embarrassing that every municipality that we share a border with holds a parkrun. We should be positioning ourselves to be the city of choice, as we all know we are. This course can obviously be used leisurely and for numerous events, and I'm by no means limiting this course to parkrun, as we should be encouraging as many events and running events in this city as possible. This is just a piece to the puzzle and will no doubt grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Marshall.
Oh, pardon me. When Councillor Byrne first raised the issue about parkrun, I sort of had a bit of a bemused or something, a vague look on my face, but after having heard her talk about it and having done a bit of research, I now have realised that I have many friends who do park runs, and it is clearly a very popular mode of exercising, and it's one we should encourage too, because when you think about all of the money and resources we put into supporting team sport, which is obviously wonderful, but we also know that the preferred sport of so many people are those casual exercise opportunities, whether it be walking, running, those types of things. So I think this is a really great idea, and I'm really pleased you brought it up. Again, for people who live in our part of the world, to be able to do a local run would be great, and hopefully they can identify some really good sites.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor to say a few words? Councillor Cusack.
Just one small observation. In the second part of your motion, Councillor Byrne, what makes these things really work is when people understand distances and stuff like that. So while your motion talks about obviously increasing accessibility and so on like that, which I'm more than happy to see, I was just wondering if we might also refer to improved signage.
Are you making a...
I'm suggesting sticking in 2 words, improved signage.
Okay.
Where?
I believe 2 words would be an informal amendment.
So it's something like the costs associated with improving paths to improve signage, or through improved signage, and to increase accessibility for wheelchairs, prams, and potential timeframes to do this.
So, Councillor Byrne, would you be happy with that?
That's fine by me, yep.
Informal amendment?
Informal.
Councillor Marshall, would you be happy with the informal amendment?
So.
Okay, so now the motion is Councillor Cusack. To speak. Well, informal. Do you still want to speak to the informal, or are you finished, Councillor?
Oh, no. So, just having said that, I mean, I look at people jogging and I worry about their cardio, but I'm more worried about my own. However, I do like a walk and I do like a stroll, and if I can do a nice 5k walk and know how far it is before I fall over, I'm happier still. But on a more specific thing, many people get a lot of joy out of first of all tackling these things, but then building up to them. And so the notion of accessibility is critical here. It's accessibility at all ages and all abilities, as you've got in there. And I would think that my small amendment just to improve signage along with the other stuff would stand up.
Thank you, Councillor. Would any other councillor to say a few words? Councillor Byrne, would you like to close?
No, just to say thank you for my fellow councillors' support. I think this is a really exciting initiative, and I think that it fits in quite well with MV 2040 and whatnot, pushing forward and setting us up for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. I now call on Councillor Nation to present his first notice of motion entitled Local Arts Display Trail. Councillor.
Thank you, Mayor. As per item 10.4 on tonight's meeting agenda, I move that Council 1 develop and trial a pilot 6-month local arts display program, giving local artists in all mediums the opportunity to display their works of art at prominent council buildings and facilities, including but not limited to the Civic Centre, Customer Service Centre, Council Chambers, Council Libraries, the Clock Tower Centre. 2, that initial contact is made with the exhibitors from our fireworks showcase and the opportunities are broadened to further local community. 3, that as part of the initial trial include the display of temporary plaques and or signage acknowledging the artists, their background, their connection to Moonee Valley and relevant contact information and or social media handles to further promote the artist. And 4, at the conclusion of the trial, for a report to be brought back to Council reviewing the pilot program and the potential for the establishment of an ongoing local arts display program, including any avenues for expansion to include outdoor artwork such as the billboard project that has previously been undertaken by Moonee Valley City Council.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Serace. Councillor Nation would like to speak to the item.
I will, and although a lengthy notice of motion, it's an extremely simple concept. Moonee Valley City Council, usually in our annual budget, allocates $30,000 to public art. That is a very insignificant amount, and it varies in terms of how this money is spent. As per the officer comments, should this amount continue forth in ongoing budgets as it has for public art, then why not showcase what the best that Moonee Valley has to offer? I reckon it's about 5.5 years I've been on council and walked in everything that's held at the Civic Centre, those same 2 framed posters advertising or celebrating art gallery displays at the incinerator from 2010 or 2012. We've got so much wall space, a lot of it here taken up by old councillor photos, and we've got so much wall space at the Clock Tower Centre, at council's libraries, not so much downstairs, where we can give local artists a platform to show off their work. It's not a great thing I'm asking. I'm not expecting things to be created especially for display. But it's a chance to say to local artists who are wanting a bit of exposure that if you'd like to have your piece of artwork, whatever it may be, hanging or placed in an area that is that Moonee Valley City Council is responsible for, then we're happy to support that. Like the billboard project, which I believe was done under the public art line item in the budget, that had a little plaque about the artist as well, and I think that's important because it does, as well as making people stop to look at the artwork, also stop to understand a little bit more about the artist. We had a discussion on the weekend about the value of art, and I think it's quite often undervalued. And when you look at how much money council pumps into sport, and I'm the first to champion sport, we also tend to forget about the minute amount we pump into art. And hopefully this is a way for those who mightn't be the champions of art or public art to understand that it's giving a platform, or if approved, and if that line item continues in our operating budget, that it will give exposure to up-and-coming Moonee Valley artists. I also want to make note that the idea of this project, or this program, is to give exposure to artists. I don't want to undervalue the input artists have, and I don't want this to be seen as a chance to pretty up our walls for free. Our walls need prettying up, and the fireworks exhibition would be a great start to contact a lot of those now first-year university students and ask them if they'd like to exhibit their work. Who knows, possibly people will walk through, look up their information, their social media handle, and either ask to buy the piece or ask more information about the artist. It's such a straightforward proposal. I'm hoping I have councillor support because the less we can see of our faces and the more we can see the brilliant work that, as a reference to myself in case anyone's taking offence, the less I can see of my face and the more I can see of some of our up-and-coming artists' work around places that public attend would be fantastic.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sorais.
Thank you. Well said, Councillor Nation, and I seconded this motion because I strongly support it. We spoke earlier about diversity in our municipality, and this is a wonderful opportunity. I've attended all of the fireworks exhibitions at the Incinerator Gallery, and the calibre of work from kids in our municipality is just, I'm speechless. It's just amazing, and such a high standard. It's really quite incredible. So I would strongly support this in the fact that we can actually enhance that and display that around our municipality. And recognition is so very, very important. So these artists in our community, in our municipality, that can be recognised for their works and their wares and what they do, and that perhaps we can engage some of that and keep that as part of our ongoing library of artwork, I think is very important. I really can't add much more than what Councillor Nation has said with regards to this motion. I do support it strongly. I think it's fantastic. People are visual. And if people have given that opportunity to see the work that other people can do, I remember we had a citizenship ceremony a couple of years ago where we had a young boy who was autistic. He actually has an art display which is called Autistic, and he does artwork.
Patrick Francis,
that's
just
it,
for a plug.
Patrick
Francis.
Thank you. Now, that was brought to the fore through our citizenship ceremony as being someone who was nominated for an arts award in the community. And there are so many untapped areas within our municipality of people who are so talented. And this is a fantastic opportunity. So thank you for bringing this motion forward. And let's see some great work coming forward in the municipality.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Councillor. Any other councillor say a few words? Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm speaking in support of the motion, and I think it's fabulous. So thank you, Councillor Nation, for bringing this to council. A couple of points I wanted to touch on, because you spoke very well, and I'm in agreement with what you've said. For me, we talk about a whole range of inequities in Moonee Valley, and we've spoken at length at times about the disparity between the spending on women's sport and men's sport, and continuing to take steps to redress that. But we certainly have an inequity in terms of the expenditure on art and sport and other recreational activities. And for me, it's something we need to do more on. We've got a very extensive plan that we need to, in the coming years, implement as much as possible. And I think we need to be mindful about the fact that many people choose to use their time, their recreational time, to enjoy the arts. They mightn't want to get out there and kick a footy or throw a netball or whatever, but they get enormous amounts of joy and pleasure out of enjoying and participating in the arts, and we need to make sure that we provide opportunities for that. So this is something, I think, anything to remove our ugly mugs. I'll chuck us all in there, no offence to the more attractive councillors. But especially your good self, Mayor. But I think it would be wonderful to provide people the opportunity to display their art. But I would like to think, touching on a really important point for me, that we need to value art also, and so that perhaps after the trial we can look at perhaps how we might compensate people appropriately for all of the time and the value that their art has.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other Councillor Cusack?
Thanks for bringing this motion, Councillor Nation. Well done and very timely. There are a number of benefits in this that are, in some senses, stepping stones to a bigger and braver future. And the kinds of things that pop into my mind are Moonee Valley is seen as a place that is supposed to be creative and healthy and so on like that. We heard just recently from a presentation from the director of the Melbourne Festival how 88% of the community actually attend an art event during the course of a year versus only 40-odd% a sporting event. So art is a really, really big thing. We have to get away from straight-jacketed definitions of art. We have to understand art in a lot of different ways. And this project actually can do that, because not only does it give the opportunity for various artists to have their work displayed, maybe done in non-conventional areas that they hadn't thought of, but also to become pointers to what's on, where the next thing is. I mean, in a comms perspective, a brochure that sort of says, come to the next art exhibition at the Incinerator and it's about page 38, versus a painting like out of the fireworks that sort of says, more of this next Saturday, be there or be square, is going to do a hell of a lot more. I think the choice of obviously areas that these can go into has all sorts of possibilities, because we should be thinking about engaging with our RSLs. We should be thinking about engaging with neighbourhood houses and so on like that. So the evaluation of this little 6-month gig of yours is so critical in terms of where do we go to and how do we promote and work up a bigger picture of what the arts really means in this municipality. I'd just like to close on a couple of other reflections. Employment opportunities in the new world that is leaving me behind, and I'm going to retire at some stage, whenever, but in the next few years, the calculations are that 25% of all new work will come up in the digital creative environment. It's taking visual arts into new places. It's putting them into different ways to look at it. How are we ever going to support our young people and the schools and all of the creative minds that are out there unless we actually start embracing the notion of what art might be? And hopefully, out of this evaluation, it might not be just something that's hung on a wall. I would love to see installations that are about performance art. I'd love to see those installations that are about bringing some music into a particular place that is an unusual place, and doing those sorts of things. No, I'm happy to leave it at that. I'm looking forward to the outcomes of this, and it is an exciting first step, but boy, you know, Rome wasn't built in a day. Let's go for it.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As one who's involved in a small way with the Moonee Valley Art Show over the weekend, late on Sunday afternoon, it does hearten my heart, which, anyway, we won't go there about that comment, but it does hearten me to see such an initiative from Councillor Nation, and the number of entries in the Moonee Valley Art Show, which the Rotary Clubs of Essendon and East Keilor, just give them a little plug, held, were at a record level this year, and mostly from local artists, and there was an under 25 section as well, all of which contributed fabulous art, absolutely fabulous. And I'm not even got a great eye for art, but I certainly enjoyed the contributions that were made by varying different artists. So there is a capacity, and that word is used often in this chamber, for art in this city, and we need to harness it, and this is a great initiative, so well done.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor say a few words? Councillor Nation, I just want to probably inform you and the rest of the council that council is in the process of acquiring some art pieces from the fireworks exhibition. So we're looking at purchasing some of the winners to become part of our permanent art display. Would you like to close?
I will, and I'll just briefly pick up on a point of Councillor Cusack's. and that's the different mediums that you can find art. And I made sure I whacked that word into point number 1. There are limitations with what you can probably presently do. You probably can't throw a song on when people are on hold, but it is that idea of thinking outside the box and what art is, and I thank the councillors that have spoken for their support of the motion.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. I now call on Councillor Nation to present his second notice of motion entitled Visual Tribute to Mrs Eliza Callaway.
Thank you, Mayor. As per item 10.5 on tonight's agenda, I move that through the means that it deems appropriate and fitting, establish a visual tribute in Kellaway Avenue to recognise Mrs Eliza Callaway, who in 1956 was recognised for her work in maternal, child and health services, then called baby health services, with the renaming of St Thomas Street in Moonee Ponds to Kellaway Avenue.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sorais. Councillor Nation, would you like to speak to the item?
I will, and this is a long time overdue because this stemmed out of our celebration of the 100 years of maternal and child health services, which was over a year ago. And at that particular celebration, that morning tea, I met a lady, Janine Brown, who was the granddaughter of Mrs Callaway. The story was then told that Kellaway Avenue was named in her honour, which is something that I never knew, having walked into the building for 4 years, that the name Kellaway had any significance. A little bit of history about why the street was named, and I don't claim to be a historian, so if some of the dates and facts are out, I do apologise. But in 1923, up at the town hall, the first baby centre, as it was called then, was opened in the cloakroom of the town hall. By 1926, a building where we currently are today, the foundation stone was laid on what was then Essendon, as the council, Essendon's first permanent baby health centre. That was followed by the second in 1936, the third in 1938, and the fourth in 1941. At that time, the committee of the baby health services was predominantly, or if not only, women. Women were running this committee. And in a short space of time, created and developed baby health centres throughout the municipality. So much so that in 1956, St Thomas Street out the front here was renamed Kellaway Avenue. And the quote in the paper at the time, 4th of October 56, was that it was named after Mrs Callaway, who carried out wonderful social work in the district and supported the Baby and Health Centre Committee. That was fairly revolutionary. In 1956, to name a street after a female is quite remarkable given the times, and quite a phenomenal piece of local history that many who walk into the Civic Centre would have no idea of. Janine did inform me that there's a few different names for Mrs Callaway: Eliza, Elise and Leslie. Most people just referred to her as Mrs Callaway. So we might need to ensure that we speak to Janine again and the Essendon Historical Society, and she might be recognised as Mrs Callaway, as everyone apparently called her at the time. But I think this is a way of recognising some of the pioneers of some essential services that exist today in our city and our state, and a lovely little touch, again, as an educative little item to let people know exactly who the street outside was named after 62 odd years ago.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sorais.
Thank you. I seconded the motion brought about by Council Nation, only because I do support the contents. But thank you for the history lesson. It's quite amazing, and it's fantastic to hear exactly how it all came about. And I'm sure there's probably a whole stream of people in our municipality that have done certain services and things. So hopefully this might open up things for people to come to us and point out these things, as that young girl did at the Maternal and Child Health Recognition Morning Tea to you. So yes, I support the motion for those reasons. Thanks.
Councillor, any other councillor to say a few words? Councillor Nation, Councillor Cusack.
Just to lock in, I suppose, something in the modern era to that. Something to lock in to the modern era, something around what you've just said. Big sign coming up, where's your microphone? And that is that this is an opportunity out the front of our municipal offices to make a statement about in 2018 that we appreciate the work of women in this municipality, and that Eliza, or whatever she went as, Callaway, is a great person who needs that acknowledgement, first of all, for what she did, but it's also that flow on and those consistent things about what we aspire to as a community in 2018. So I'm hoping that the tribute that gets developed is not just a little historical plaque, but that it in fact is one of aspiration, and it's one of hope for the future, and it's one of talking about the power of what women have done in this community as well. And I'd just like to see that as a part of it all.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nation, any other councillor? Councillor Nation, would you like to close?
I will just, being Mrs. Kellaway had the street named after her in 1956. Her granddaughter isn't a young girl; she's a mature lady, a principal down at a school in the on the peninsula. Just to clarify the time period. But otherwise, I hope other councillors see this a fitting tribute.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. I now call Council Nation to present his last notice of motion, entitled Review of Informative Street Signs. Obviously, this has got a connection.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So as per item 10.6 on tonight's agenda, I move that the Chief Executive Officer prepare a report to come before an ordinary meeting of Council detailing a current list of informative street signs that are erected throughout the municipality, recognising individuals after whom streets have been named. B, a recommendation if any of the existing signs require updating, a redesign or replacement. And C, a list of suggestions of any additional signs that could be erected following contact with local bodies such as the Essendon Historical Society and Wurundjeri Land Council, with a particular emphasis on new informative street signs that identify streets that have been named after prominent females or after prominent elders or sites that recognise the area's Indigenous history.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Marshall will second that. Councillor Nation, would you like to speak to it?
Thank you. And for those following on the agenda, if you are, I do feel that the officer comments below this item don't quite capture what the motion was asking for. In fact, in saying that the motion was not supported, it actually provides some of the information asked in A and B, pretty much the information asked in A and B. In Moonee Ward, we had a number of signs, obviously, as the officer comments note, erected in reference to prominent individuals who served or were part of World Wars I or II as part of the Anzac 100-year commemorations, and they were put under street signs such as Churchill Ave, being named after Winston Churchill. 10 of the signs reference local identities or individuals that went off to war. Having read these officer comments, I didn't realise that they were the only informative street signs that we have, other than some relics of 1983's most beautiful street. I'm sure there's a few of those that are that are still up. But it heartens me, firstly, that as per point B, obviously the signs don't need updating or redesigning because they're quite new, and A, that there is currently 12 locations where informative street signs are located. Going on to talk about point C, this is not a process of analysing 1,100 streets, roads, lanes, what have you, in the municipality and getting a history of each one. It's about going to some of the larger organisations that collect records and history of the area, being Essendon Historical Society, being the Flemington Association, and getting some information about the history of some of our street names. Going back to the previous item, it was only after meeting Janine that I even knew Kellaway Avenue was named after Mrs. Kellaway. And I would hope that in the years that have transpired since, some of the other streets around Moonee Valley have been named after prominent females from the area. I don't know, and probably no one around these chambers know, unless they have a direct connection. So point C asks for a council officer, and I can do it if it needs to be done, to contact these bodies and ask that question. Because it may really interest people, like the previous item, to hear the backstory about some of our forebearers that have left their legacy on our community. I've also put in there that we contact the Wurundjeri Land Council and ask them about any specific sites or street names that have a direct connection to the Wurundjeri people. In my grabbing items off my little folder on my desk, or whatever you call those things, a lot of that work about identifying names from the Wurundjeri people are in this Moonee Valley publication anyway, and I'm sure there's a great more detail that you could get off the Wurundjeri Land Council. It's not a big ask, it's a way of starting discussion, it's a way of recognising the legacy of some of the really prominent individuals in our municipality. I'm not suggesting we go out there and put up 1,100 informative street signs, and we need to know that Keith Street was named after a common male name from the 1960s. This is about coming back to us and saying, did you know this Kellaway Avenue was actually named after a woman called Mrs. Kellaway in 1956, and then taking that message to the broader community. This is also only asking for a report. It's not committing to the erection of any of these signs. It is just saying, how can we recognise the history of our area and prominent local individuals?
So you were just asking for a report.
That's what the motion is.
Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, I'm rising to very much speak in support of this motion, and Councillor Nation, you've been on fire tonight, and you've had some really positive, constructive and valuable motions that you've brought to Council, so thank you for that. We certainly know, and we've seen it even tonight, that Australian history has traditionally been viewed through a very narrow lens, and the role of women and the role of Indigenous people and a whole range of other people, other than a particularly narrow sector, has flown under the radar, has not been recognised, the deeds and the exploits of the other, if you like. And for me, that's why this is so positive, because we know the value of role models. We know how valuable it is for a little girl to read about the exploits of women, the ones that have so often gone unspoken of, that have not been recognised. In the same way, for a young Indigenous child to read about the exploits of Indigenous role models, you just think about how valuable that is. So I really hope we have some things that come out of this from left field. I really do. Some things that we just weren't aware of, or only a very small number of people were aware of. So I'm very supportive of this, and I'm looking forward to the report.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor to say a few? Councillor Cusack.
Not sure that interesting, Mayor. Listen, wasn't all that long ago that this council celebrated its 150th birthday as a city, or as a recognised as in local government, and we're rapidly moving towards our 160th. Seems to me that there's a real interesting connection, and that between this motion and taking that into it. You talked about the historical connection and all that sort of stuff, and I suspect that and given that there are so many new people who have moved into this municipality over the years, they're not 3 and 4 and 5 generations deep into it, and so having these simple little things as just suggestions can become the next little point to urge somebody on to continue to find out something. But we talk about I'm just harking back to the diversity matter that was raised in this agenda. And one of the things that's actually in that part of the document, it talks about storytelling. And streets and local landscapes and places that we all call our neighbourhoods are about storytelling. So I applaud this motion. I don't live in, I live nearby Travancore. Now, why is it called Travancore, and what's the history behind that? And why are all these Indian names all over the place? And then you start to think about, this is where horses were registered in Moonee Valley before they were taken across before 1900 to India to be used in the British Army over there. So we were picking up all the Brumbies from up in the north, in the deep country, and settling them down here in Flemington. Sounds like a normal story. But even the school has a new little lane named in it that's got a name in it that is actually the Travancore, the capital city of Travancore back in India, or the old state of Travancore. So, and living in Moonong and Moonong Crescent, I'd love to see somebody put up a little note about the daisy and as a staple food item. So all of these sorts of things are terrific. And if it's about how we all embrace our neighbourhoods and love them, and just find that bit of a notion about Avondale Heights was founded in the 60s, but it's a rapidly becoming an old place, folks. If you live a bit longer, you'll be celebrating its 100th anniversary soon, and so on like that. So these are the things that are the connections. And I just wonder, and I love the fact that in your third point you've got such as the Historical Society and the Wurundjeri Council. Let's expand it out and just suggest anybody in the municipality who's got an interest in a street sign, who actually knows a little bit, should contact us so as to start that ball rolling.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor to say a few words? Councillor Nation, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Councillors, next item is urgent business. Councillors, do we have any items of urgent business on tonight's agenda? No. Confidential reports. Councillors, we do not have no confidential reports listed this evening. So, councillors, officers, and our live streaming audience, thank you very much. I bid you all a very good night, and thank you for being and watching in attendance in council, and I declare the meeting closed.